Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mindful Play Summit. Today, we have the opportunity to sit down with Wendy O'Leary. She is the author and public speaker who teaches mindfulness and skills for emotional intelligence, regulation, and resiliency. Wendy is the co-author of the award-winning children's book, Breathing Makes It Better. Her second book is due to publication in 2022. She is an online contributor to the Mindful magazine and a guest lecturer for undergraduate college classes. Wendy has taught in hundreds of pre-K to K classrooms and for nonprofit organizations. She's also facilitator in professional development trainings and parent workshops on emotional intelligence and mindfulness for children. Thanks so much for watching. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mindful Place Summit. Today, we have Wendy O'Leary here to speak with us. I am super excited that you are here today. Thank you so much, Wendy.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little better and sharing a little bit more about these teachings from my perspective.
Beautiful. So let's just start off with a little bit about yourself and how you got into, mindfulness with youth and children.
Oh, it's a great question. So, I would say that my own practice is sort of what spurred on my teaching. And, as I started to see the impact of practice in my own life, I started to wonder, being a teacher and having worked with children in the past, I was like, this is helping me. Um, it probably would be beneficial for young people. And I had this situation where my son was actually in a school where there was a yoga club. And he came home one day and he was in middle school. And that's, here where you have multiple classes. So there's a lot more kind of to balance and organize. And he came home from school one day, he put his backpack down. And he looked at me and he's like, I'm going to take a breath of joy. I need to do a little sitting and I'll come and do my homework and have a snack and do my homework. And he went in the other room. He did his breath of joy. He sat, took a few breaths, and he sat back down at that table, calmer, more focused. And I was like, okay, yes, I see it. It does help young people. And so I began to play with the teachings from there. At that point, I started probably about 15 years ago. Um, there wasn't a lot out there. There wasn't as much conversation around it. And so I started just looking at how do I adapt? And this is a piece of what I want to share with people, be creative, make it up, come from your own sort of felt experience of the practice and think about how you would then translate that for little ones. So I started to kind of work with doing that and started slowly trying it out in a few classes. At that point, I was already a yoga teacher, teaching adults, started working with children. So it was sort of a natural kind of progression, but I have really shifted where my practice is mindfulness based with body based experiences within that.
I love that. And I see your little book in the back corner, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But definitely a beautiful storytelling about that, because I think he's showing you modeled behavior. So he learned that from somebody, I wonder who, but to see that coming back as, wait a second, I just need a moment. What a beautiful, beautiful reflection. I
Yeah.
love that. So let's talk a little bit about curiosity and how this can be kind of brought in as an interest and connected within mindful practices for not only yourself as an adult, but also children.
Yeah. So I really wanted, and I was excited when I saw sort of the framing of your summit because I thought it was a great opening to talk about this really crucial piece of practice that I think is really often kind of overlooked. So often we're focused on skills for calming and regulation, and those are important. I'm not saying they aren't. And yet, there are deeper opportunities within this practice in this cultivation of sort of the what I talk about as sort of the attitudinal competencies of mindfulness. What are those competencies? And so it has to do with how we relate. How are we relating to our experience? So it's really for me an important shift and transition to start looking at encouraging interest and curiosity about our experience. Interesting. Noticing a little frustration. What's that about? What's happening in my body, heart, and mind? Right. So that cultivation of a really deep interest in what's happening. And I know for me personally, and I talked a little bit about this with you personally, but this transition for me in my own practice of the cultivation of skills to regulate, calm my nervous system, notice what was there. And then I had a huge shift in my personal practice when I started to take a sincere interest in what was there, not try to get rid of it, right? With children, I always say all feelings welcome. They just don't have to be in charge. And by welcome, we
Yeah.
want to get to know them. And so that's where this curiosity and interest piece comes in. And children are naturally curious, right? In some ways, we kind of push that out of their systems. Let's invite that in. Let's water those seeds. And in particular, let's water those seeds around their own experience. And so that's sort of where, for me, this crucial component of interest and curiosity. How do we get them to be interested in what's happening right now?
I love that, and I just think about my own personal story of childhood, right? It's like, hey, you want to feel that? That's fine. Go into your room and close the door. So the suppressed emotion has just become a culture of not allowing us to feel. And that's when we see like the physical dis-ease or those types of things coming in. But what a beautiful expression to add that curiosity to feelings, emotions, learning, like being outside. And I just remember taking the children out and being around the tree. They're like, why are we standing by the tree? And I said, well, let's lean on the tree. How does it feel to feel the tree support you? And let's look at the bark. And that deepened curiosity, if it's in, the feelings, the emotions, the learning, I just love that. I like to call it the enrichment, right? Where we just take it that deeper level. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is such a key component. And for children, often what I'll start with is I will do things like out in nature. So, what does it feel like? What does it smell like? What can we touch? Can we hear the wind going through the tree? Using all the senses. And then from outside, go in. And how does it feel how does it feel for me when I lean against the tree or when I hear? I love the wind in the trees. For me, is one of those very unpleasant sounds. How does it feel in your body when you hear the sound of the wind in the tree? So we want to just maintain that kind of interest and curiosity. The suppressing of feelings is isn't supportive of learning or change, right? So if we push down anger, we're not working with it. We're just saving it for later, letting it grow. It's festering like a volcano, right? It's going to come out somewhere. We want to encourage children to understand that all feelings are informative,
Absolutely.
and again, they don't have to be in charge. And so, ways to do that through our mindfulness practice are really important. So, the self calming piece, regulation, kind of the focal point in many ways in breathing makes it better, though there's some interest and curiosity how feelings feel in the body is in there. And, how do we then move from, okay, we've regulated, we've come, how do we really get close up with our feelings and get close up with our experience and notice that for ourselves. And again, children take to this like that. I mean, this is their natural inclination. We're just
Absolutely.
playing with that. And play is such an important word. And I love that you used it because um, that's what we want to do. We don't want this to be another to do. Okay, we're going to do our mindfulness now, right? We want to be playful about it. We want to, again, be interested and curious. What's happening? How do I want to be with this?
Oh, I love that. Thank you. So, what are some of your favorite strategies or techniques that you like to share with children into this aspect of your practice?
So, I would say, in terms of practices, one of the things I talk about, and I guess I want to just front load it with a quick comment, if that's okay,
Yeah, of
is
course.
to just say that often mindfulness is taught as practices. Here's some techniques, here's some strategies. And I am a super practical, concrete person. So I love those. Don't get me wrong. And they are really important.
Yeah,
And mindfulness, in terms of the way I teach it, um, is really a way of being. It's my own practice. It's a way of being in the world. How are we in the world? And these practices, so it's really important when we talk about these practices, and this is why I want to front load it. The practices are done with the intention of what? It's really important for us to be super clear on that. So I'm practicing with the intention of cultivating interest and curiosity, of cultivating awareness, of cultivating acceptance, cultivating kindness and compassion, right? So I think I would encourage if there are teachers, educators, parents listening who intend to use any of the strategies that you learn with little ones, is to always pay attention to what's your intention when you're doing this. And the reason for this is, again, so often they get misconstrued, the intention. So, a breathing practice, for example, if the intention gets misconstrued, then here's how it can be interpreted. And I've had people um, say to me that they've done this, right? Their child is upset about something and they say to them, because they've seen, not read, but have seen the name of the book, and I told them, Wendy, breathing makes it better, just breathe. You hear the tone, you hear, what's the message, what's the intention? Stop being upset. It's what you talked about before, go in your room and deal with that. um,
Absolutely.
don't be upset. It's the suppression of the feelings. So it's really important, even with these self-regulation practices, that they're that we're clear on our intention, because that comes through in so many ways. So I always like to say that before I share practices.
I
I
appreciate
want
that.
people to think about, when they share them, being really clear about their intention. I will say, one time I did a training and I was teaching about the mindfulness. I was using the bell, right? Closing our eyes, listening to the bell. And I'll talk a little more about that. But there was a father in the training, and his wife later told me that they started using the bell every morning before school. They were using and doing the bell. And then one day he was like, things were chaotic, right? And here's where we lose the piece of, oh, can I be interested? Okay, chaos, right? How does that feel? Feeling overwhelmed. What's that like as the adult, right? We got to regulate ourselves so we can co regulate with the children. But instead, they were running out the door. He realized they didn't do the bell. He's like, we have to ring our mindfulness bell. Whack, right? So intention, intention, intention. Make sure, which doesn't mean sometimes we won't do that. And, we all have those days and those moments, self kindness, acceptance, and move from there. But to the degree that you can really start catching your intention before you do practices is so important.
I
So,
absolutely love that. And just if I may add, I
mhm.
recognize that in my own family circle where we would do gratitude before dinner. And then our practice needed to change because we got to a place where the children were hungry. And all of a sudden they're like, I'm so happy and grateful for it just to get through it. And there was no, their intention wasn't being met. So we had to move and flow our practice. So now we do it before we go to bed. And that's okay, right? You might try something and say, hey, you know what? This is working with this group, or hey, you know what? We have to move and flow other. But I love that intentional piece being at the core to recognize that it's not just sitting and doing, it's just being able to be. And sometimes it's an offering, and maybe the children or whoever we're supporting doesn't want to take part in that too. So I absolutely love that intention piece. So thank you for that.
And I love the flexibility that you mentioned, right? Because that's another attitudinal competency that I talk about when I do my more extended teachings. How are we flexible around the practices? How are we flexible about meeting children where they are? It doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to, right? And so being able to kind of play around with all of those pieces. So, in terms of specific practices, I like to do some that are, like I said, mentioned, focused on external experience, like the objects of attention of our awareness out here. So you mentioned the tree. That is one of my favorite practices, is not necessarily a tree, but anything in nature. So taking a mindful walk. What do we hear? Maybe we stop, close our eyes, and notice 5 sounds. How do you feel when you notice those sounds? What can we touch? How many things that are green do we see? Right, like, so using all of our senses and being really deeply curious. So, okay, we're going to look at this tree. What are all the parts of the tree that we can see? How do they all feel? So, really cultivating this intimacy of attention, right? Like, really sort of an exquisite connection to whatever's happening right here in this moment. And then that can be transferred. When I use the mindfulness bell, so I'll use that as another hearing. So using any of the senses can work. Um, I'll often say to children, "And can we listen that closely to each other, to our friends?" Right? When it's their turn to talk, let's listen with that kind of like rapt attention. Because for those who've done the mindfulness bell, you notice that when they listen, they're listening very closely. It's often, until you can't hear the sound. So they're really wrapped in attention. Um, can we listen that closely to each other? So I play a lot of listening games. I have shaking things that you can match the sounds, or I'll have, guess what the sound is. So I'll shake something, I'll make noise with something. Can you guess what this is? I'll do activities that are, touch. So again, anything with nature, I'm a huge fan. And we have nature-based analogies, and breathing makes it better. There's a lot of benefit. Nature is such a great analogy for so much of the practice. So I will sometimes get some things in nature, put them in a bag, put your hand in. What does it feel like? And then see if children can guess what it is. And then you can take things out and say, okay, when we're working with feelings, so I'll start with external, right? What we see, what we hear, mirror game. Can you watch somebody that closely? Even Simon Says that we've been playing forever, right? Children have been playing since, I don't know. I know I played it as a child, so
Me too.
a long time. Um, so that is a mindfulness game. We're listening really closely to see if they said Simon Says, but we're also watching, right? So there's a lot of it's the framing of it. So you want to make sure to say and use words. Again, this is the intention piece. So use words like, can we be really interested in how this tree feels? How the wind sounds, how the waves. I live on a lake, so I was just outside right before I met with you, and I closed my eyes. I was just listening to the different. How many different birds do you think you hear outside? That's one of the things I just did. Right, I can hear all the different birds. How so playing with, but using the words interest, curiosity, I wonder. Again, not specific practices, but ways that we really want to cultivate the intention when we're doing the practice. So I start with those things, and then I start to work internally. So, how does it feel in your body? If you listen to music, how many voices do you hear, or what different instruments do you hear? But then you can move into how do you feel when you hear this music? How does it make you feel in your body? And one of the things I used to do this with my children, and this was before I even had a mindfulness practice myself when they were very little. I would listen to music and I put all kinds of like craft supplies out on the table and glue and glitter and all different kinds of material and say, listen to the music. We close our eyes and we'd sort of take some breaths and just listen for a few minutes. And then I'd say, now, whatever the music makes you feel like, put that on your paper. Use whatever you want and make a picture that shows how the music makes you feel. So we do know that using music, using movement, art lights up the brain, helps with learning. So integrating any of those kinds of components, super, super helpful. But then I'll start to work with emotions. So I'll play games like feeling statues. So I'll put on music, and when we freeze, I'll say, freeze like you're angry. And we'll do different kinds of emotions, but we'll talk about so not just doing it again. What's my intention? It's not just a game. It can be fun, but it's not just a game. So how does it feel in your body? What does your body look like? How can you tell how somebody else is? Sometimes we'll use cards, and one child will pick a card for an emotion, and they'll do the feeling statue, and the other children, yeah. So the social emotional learning component there. Um, but again, I wonder, how do you know that they're angry? How do you know they're an angry statue or a sad statue? So using the terminology that
Oh my
helps
gosh.
children to kind of be interested. And then it's one of the last ones. I could go on.
I love it. I'm
I
just
could
soaking
go
it all
on.
in.
Super excited about these practices. I have seen the difference. I mean, I've been doing this for so many years and have seen the impact that they make. So I do get pretty excited about these teachings. I'm very passionate about it. And but I will share one last one, and that is I do a parade activity. So when I do the parade activity, I do the whole, you're in your own bubble to make sure. And I use a bell in between different parade characters, and we'll do a breath in between the bells. And um, we'll parade like we are, and you could use animals. Right? How the different, and then how does it feel in your body? How did it feel to be the lion versus the monk? How did the monkey feel? How did right? You can use that, or sometimes I'll do a parade of like just a whole variety of things, like you're walking on really, really thin ice. You have to be super careful. Parade like you're a king or a queen. Parade, and then we'll talk about, and then I'll ring the bell, we'll do the breath. How does that feel in your body? What were your favorite? I wonder what your favorites were. How did it feel to be the king or queen? When are other times that you feel like that? So I really try to captivate and capture that. And you could also just do parading as different feelings. And so just to say a little plug here. So my next book, I think I mentioned Breathing Makes It Better, Self-Regulation Strategies. But I will share a little bit about how you can use that book for curiosity as well. And my next book is called The Monster Parade.
Yay.
Monsters are, I've seen the monsters. They're super cute. Um, and that book is a lot, kind of takes that next shift around how do we get up close with our feelings? How do we be interested and curious about this parade, these monsters that are going by? So activities around any way that you can have the children have something representational about a feeling, because we unfortunately so often identify with our feelings and think I am such and such, angry, sad, you know whatever the feeling is, worried. It's a big one right now, especially. How do we help children to kind of do a little bit of and ourselves, I might add, do a little disidentifying with our feelings? So making monsters, depending on the age, it can be as simple as like a pencil and an index card with colors on it, right? And there's your little puppet of how you feel a different feeling, and you can have your feelings parade by, right? They don't stay, they come and they go. We can have them parade
Mhm.
by. How do I get along with this puppet? So lots of games and activities. And again, this is where I say, like, use your imagination as the adults and make it fun and playful. What would engage the children? You know the children you're working with or living with best. How do you engage them? And then just the last piece about breathing makes it better to use for curiosity. So yes, the book talks about like a different scenario, and then there's sort of the refrain that comes through it that's about stop and take a breath. Um, and so when we do the stopping and taking a breath part, I always do that with the children. That's the self-regulation. And I'm sure you're going to have lots of people talk about those skills and the breathing skills. So I'm going to I put those to the side for the most part, from my conversation with you today, though they are really important. Um, but in the beginning, when they're in the midst of the situation, before they stop and take a breath, they notice their face feels hot and fiery, is one of the examples in the book. So I often, when I'm reading the book to children, I don't read it straight through. I always stop and say, when are times that your face feels hot and fiery? What are other words for hot and fiery? What are other ways you feel when the word, because then we do name the feeling, anger, because we know when you name a feeling, you take away its power. We bring our prefrontal cortex back online, that model of the brain where we can flip our lid if, when a message comes up, this old part of our brain is the part that kind of does the fight, flight, freeze, is the part that takes care of us. And then we have this part, the part of the brain that is more involved in higher order thinking. But when we think there's a problem, this part takes over and we flip our lid, right? So I think people quite possibly heard this analogy before. And naming a feeling brings this back online. So in the book, we name the feeling, but what we want to do is say, when, so here's the curiosity part. That's the regulation, curiosity. When are other times when that you feel that way? What are things that you've done? I wonder what else you could do. We did stop and take a breath, and we use analogy, a nature analogy in each of the stories. But what else could you do? What are some other things, right? So we want to give them tools that they can own, that they feel empowered, that they have agency to work with what's happening. And curiosity is that first step, that wondering and that feeling like, oh, I can figure this out. I can understand this and I can do something with it. So breathing makes it better, though predominantly I think of it predominantly when I use it for teaching as around the self-regulation, but there are components of it that also kind of tie into this piece around wonder and curiosity.
I love all of that. I could sit and just listen to you talk all day. What comes to my mind is, as educators or parents, we may be doing certain things throughout our day, but the way that you're explaining it is by adding intention, by adding a deeper awareness, by doing some practices for ourselves with the children, it can layer this beautiful, maybe they're already out doing certain things, but by bringing in your senses, by enriching that. I loved how you used the words, more of an intimate connection. Like that really resonated with me because sometimes the perception is, oh, if I bring in this extra one thing or we're do, now I got to do this and do that. But what you're saying is it's easy to just remove all of that and go into a place of being and ask deeper questions, to go a little bit deeper with that curiosity. I feel that a lot of educators or parents that are listening could add those simple little tweaks to their teachings of what they're doing, and maybe they're sitting there playing, creative play, or they're with dinosaurs, and it's just bringing that into a different realm, different layer of enrichment. So thank you, because that completely resonates with me, and I absolutely love you talking. I just sit here and listen, and but I wanted to say thank you for that piece, because a lot of the times we feel we got to do, and it's just be and explore and be curious, and have that peace. So I have a question about, what are some roadblocks that could kind of pop up or get in the way of approaching this practice, or barriers, and how could you suggest that we kind of work with those?
So if you don't mind, before I jump into that,
Yes,
we could go
I
on for a
know.
long time.
Where's the tea? Let's bring on the tea.
But before I go on to roadblocks, because it is really important, I just want to say one of my favorite practices that I do with children, and this is the epitome of what you were just saying, right? That yes, there are strategies, there are techniques, there is direct instruction, and yet really mindfulness can be integrated. We can be mindful of anything. Mindfulness holds it all. We can be mindful of anything. So here's a practice that I do often when I go into classes that I just love. And you can see how it impacts the children right on the spot. So again, right, we all learn from experience. This is an experiential practice. So I really capturing teachable moments is important. That's that flexibility you were talking about. I might go in and be planning to talk about one thing, and I have a little one in front of me who's doing some drumming or whatever. And so I'll shift my practice to address like some other component of practice that might attend to that, right? The awareness of what we're doing. What are our hands doing? Let's notice our hands. So having that flexibility, this practice that I do when I go in sometimes, particularly when I'm going in just predominantly to do a visit with the book, it's a one-time thing. And I'm not in there very long. I don't get to hear from the children that much as opposed to when I go in for more an extended period of time doing a more intensive program. But they all want to share something, of course, right? We all know the little ones that get really excited. They want to talk to the grown-ups. And so what I'll do is at some point, I'll usually have a question that I'm going to ask the children. And I'll have already talked about noticing feelings and that they don't have to be in charge, how we notice them in our bodies. I've talked about the alarm system a little bit. And so I'll say, okay, so I have a question to ask you, but we're also going to practice noticing how something feels in our body and noticing a feeling and not letting it be in charge. So I'm going to ask a question, and I don't want you to raise your hands until I count to three. So I want you to notice, how does it feel to want to raise your hand? And particularly like the little ones up to kindergarten, even first graders. After first grade, this one's a little harder sell, but up to first grade children, how does it feel? And you can use different things for those age groups, but how does it feel to want to raise your hand? And then I'll count really slowly. One, like notice what does your body feel like? Maybe we'll do our breathing while we're waiting. And so we'll practice breathing. Two, and like and sometimes they'll raise their hand. Notice if you raise your hand, that's okay. That happens sometimes. And we can begin again. Let's put it down and let's count. And so we'll do that. And then I'll process with them. How did it feel? What's that feel? Does that feeling have a name? So some will say boredom, they were bored waiting. Some will say excitement, they were really excited, they wanted their turn. Some will say that they were worried they wouldn't get a turn, right? So having them notice what does it feel like in your body, and it's so empowering because every child, and again, I do this with kindergartners a lot. I've done it in preschools. They can do it, right? They can regulate in that way. And so it's very much giving them a sense of agency and awareness. I'm not doing anything different than I would have done anyways, have them raise their hand to answer a question. A friend of mine was doing an activity where they were doing planting of seeds, and there's so many analogies we
Mhm.
could use with planting of seeds, right? What are we growing? What are we weeding? All of those things. But she also used the like notice, we were talking about this teaching, and I said, you could turn this into a moment of mindfulness, right? Notice how it feels while you're waiting to get your seed, right? The teacher's coming around, you're waiting. How does it feel about waiting for it to grow? Notice how does that feel? So any activities that we're doing,
Love that.
um, right? We can't go outside today, it's too cold. Let's notice, how does that feel? I wonder how that feels in your body when you hear that. Anytime we can always encourage, you know, any awareness of going on in the body. So barriers.
Yes.
So I think the biggest barrier is that this way of teaching. So, and this isn't to say that certainly teachers without their own intensive practice or practice can certainly teach some very basic breathing strategies. They can read breathing makes it better. Stop, take a breath. Right. So it doesn't mean those skills aren't accessible, but to really teach mindfulness in this more intentional way, integrating these attitudinal competencies requires our own practice, right? And so we need to understand from our own practice how we cultivate or don't interest and curiosity, what gets in our own way, so that we can then use that as a barometer when we're working with children. So I think that is, to me, probably the biggest barrier, and that it isn't a pull off the shelf. Yes, there are strategies. Yes, I've written things, pull off the shelf, and there are some techniques and strategies, but it has to go a little bit deeper. And that doesn't mean it needs to take a ton of extra time, but it's a different level of commitment, I think, from teachers to teach with that level of intentionality. That said, again, it doesn't mean that without that you can't teach some basic breathing practices. You can't like do, like the breathing ball, right? Breathing in and out, and do some skills for regulation. But if you're really going into mindfulness, um, which is this present moment awareness of whatever's arising moment by moment and how you're relating to it, this level of interest and curiosity is really a crucial component and really hard to teach if you haven't had any personal experience with it.
I agree. And coming from an educator who has moved through burnout
Yeah.
and the awareness around it, it really works. And hearing what you're saying, I just get excited because I want to play along too. But I know by embodying my own personal practice, I was able to see things from a different view. I was able to honor those pieces inside of me that I wasn't honoring. I was just giving my all, and I'm sure some of our listeners can relate, giving my all to those around me, but nothing left for my own personal family or my own self. And by incorporating what you're talking about from my own experience, it supported me to do the practices throughout my day so I could ease and flow with chaos or whatever. And my stimulus and now my response is a lot more calm, cool, collected. And I noticed when I'm not teaching, I have to up my own personal practice in my own world to balance out because I get all the good things when I'm teaching. So having that awareness, but I wanted to share from a personal standpoint the difference from, the I would say more of a reactive educator and mom to now being more of a, ease and flow and responding as an educator and a parent. And my 10-year-old daughter said to me, Mom, you're such a different person. And I said, oh, okay, can we talk about that? I was really excited. I said, let me know how I'm different. She goes, well, things don't bug you as much. You're more calm when you respond. I noticed that, when you need a moment, you take a moment. And just hearing that from my own 10-year-old to hear the older version versus who I am, for our listeners, like whatever that personal practice is, it could be just something simple for yourself, or even sitting in your car in silence before you go into your class for the day, or coming home, or being with your family. It's really supported me. So I wanted to share that because I know a lot of the times there's judgment, or, I shouldn't do that, or can I do that? And I've even had my own, as we shared prior to this conversation, I had my own personal judgment of stepping into that being space, and afraid of, all of the stereotypes and judgment, and being able to just release all of that and know that it's supporting me. It's like regulate, it's almost like, if you go to the chiropractor, massage therapist, or the dentist, I mean, we are just working with our own nervous system each and every day and balancing that out. So I wanted to share that little personal
Yeah,
reflection piece as well.
yeah, and we could talk for quite a while about
Right.
about everything, but the benefits for individuals, but a particular research around benefits for teachers, burnout, but also classroom management. When you practice, so the research shows that even if you don't directly teach children mindfulness, if you practice, it impacts the classroom. If
I
you
believe
have
that for
your practice.
sure.
And to say, yes, your practice does not have to be sitting for, in a lengthy period of time. It could be walking into the building mindfully, right? Doing anything. So just to try and bring that into your life, that interest, that curiosity, and ways that you can do that. And there's so much out there in terms of making these practices more accessible for people. So I would strongly encourage people to kind of give it a try. And I know there is that I'm already burnt out. I can't do one more thing. Again, it's something you can kind of add to your day. I was just washing dishes. Can I wash them and feel that water on my hands? I'm still washing the dishes. They have to get washed.
Mhm.
Why don't I actually be here while I'm doing it? So those are the kinds of things that we can integrate, and even those types of things will make a huge difference. One of the things I do in a lot of schools that I teach in is, in addition to doing a professional development about how to teach children, and doing some in class, I do some modeling in classes for schools. I also often will do a 4-part series on mindfulness for the educators, to give people some very basic initial tools for their own practice. How do I support myself? Because let's face it, especially with the past year, there's a lot going on and people are really dealing with a lot. How do we support ourselves? How do we, self compassion practice for me has been a go to this year with everything going on. That is an aspect of my practice that I've really leaned into. How do we do that for ourselves? How do we hold everything with kindness and compassion that's arising, and support ourselves in that way? So, yeah, I would really encourage people to do that. And I love that you actually can speak personally about seeing that shift in your life. So, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Now we can talk a little bit about some teaching tips, and then I wanted to move into a little bit about your breathing song because that really excites me. I like to play. Can you tell? I'm like, let's play, Wendy.
Playing is fun, and even when I teach adults, so I also teach mindfulness to adults. I run a couple of groups and do some teaching. And I never realized until somebody in my group said, you use the word play all the time, but even with adults, we need to make this like an exploration. How does this heart, mind, body work? Isn't this interesting? Like that's really what we, what we want to do. So tips, we've kind of covered a lot of them, right? That flexibility, letting go of looking for specific results, right? We want to let go of a result orientation and move to an intention orientation. Um, how do we One thing that I often will say is don't teach in the midst of a crisis. So if a child is tantruming, that isn't the moment to teach them a breathing technique for the first time, right? Because basically we have these neural pathways, these sort of reactive ways of dealing with things, and we're trying to kind of rework some of those to create that space. You talked about reaction versus responding, right? Something happens, we react. We want to cultivate a little space so we can have a response, but that takes practice. So often I'll say it's just like if play a sport. You're not going to go and pitch the ball for the first time at the championship, or you're not going to play the piano piece for the first time at the recital. Practice so that you're cultivating the capacity. We want to make it accessible. So don't teach mid crisis, meet children where they are. And I think something you said earlier, I was going to jump in and say this, but I knew we would probably talk about tips later, reminded me of this idea that you want to be really cautious. And again, this is why teaching from our own practice helps, not to like force the practice on children. So, for example, I'll sometimes teach with little ones like zipping up and sitting, right? Sitting our straight body, like our strong, I'll talk about strong, silent, and still bodies. So our strong bodies. And when I'm going into a classroom, I'll have to preempt the teachers by saying, do not correct them if they are not sitting up strong. It's totally fine. This is not math, right? This is a practice where we really want to meet children where they are. And if for some reason a particular practice or a particular way of being, we want to be really cautious around sort of forcing that on children. So we're planting seeds. And if a child is kind of slumped over, that's fine. I'm planting the seed. Strong body. How do we feel when we sit in a strong body, right? So we want to talk about these things, but never forcing practice. And even sometimes, particularly if you're able to work one on one with children, it may be as simple as saying, this might not be the move for you. That's okay. Here, I wonder if we should try this. And I always, once children have tools, I always give them options. I wonder what breathing practice, might be interesting to you today. Give them choice, give them agency. So really making sure that we're not kind of top down, that sense of suppressing. Like we're telling you what to do to get rid of
Absolutely.
your feelings. Often is sort of how it gets translated. So a lot, I guess, I know I've said this multiple times, but it is something that really worries me as mindfulness has become more mainstream, is that it's misunderstood as a way to kind of curb children's feelings or suppress those feelings. And that is not at all the actual intention of the practices. So we want to really be cautious around that. Again, your own
Absolutely.
practice is really supportive and useful. Those are the ones that sort of jump out at me off the top of my head as the really most important ones to kind of think about, and using the terminology. Interest, curiosity, wonder. I talk about the alarm system. I use another model of a brain. I use the shaking jar. Actually, this is another great visual practice. Right now, it only has one color in it, but sometimes I'll do different colors for different things, and then I'll shake it up, and then I'll say, "Tell me how many notes. See how many colors you can see," and then we'll watch as it settles. So this is when the alarm goes off, right? And then this is when we settle the alarm in our nervous system, of course. So I use that terminology. I wonder, it looks to me like there might be a lot of sadness. I wonder, I wonder if that's how you feel. Can you tell me how that feels? I wonder how it feels for you. I wonder if there's something that you want to do to be with your sadness, not to get rid of, right? How do you want to be with your sadness? How do you want to be with that angry feeling? So I utilize the terminology a lot. And I think that that's a really important thing for us to be doing. Again, it's not just techniques. Um, so I think those are kind of some of the main tips that I would suggest. And start small. Like don't, I am the kind of person sort of like you. I'm like, oh, there's this. We could do this. I get very excited about the practices. And so don't try and do too much at once. Like pick one maybe regulation practice, self-regulation practice, one kind of breathing practice that might be useful or other regulation, and then pick one thing to be curious about a day. Pick, just start slowly, but what happens is it just becomes the way that you are with everything eventually. Then whatever you're doing, you yourself are curious, and so you happen to ask that to the children.
I love that. I just see like layering, right? Start simple, create that foundation and build upon it. And also, as you mentioned before, like modeling that behavior, letting the children know when teachers now are going to just sit here and just be for a moment to just take a few breaths and talking about how we're also feeling so that they can see,
Yes.
that's what teacher needs right now. Let's join in, or it's an offering for them to come and sit too. So thank you for all of those shares. I love, love, love that. Now we've got here, so for our listeners today, Wendy has given a link to download the breathing song as a free gift. So that'll be posted below here on your speaker page. Now, do you want to take us through the breathing song together today?
I most certainly will be
Yay.
happy to take you through the breathing song. And just to say, like, I love those additions to like to the tips. It's really, all of it is just so important. This idea of layering and not kind of getting overwhelmed with the practice is super important because I think so many people just to validate that so many people are feeling overwhelmed right now. And I think it's just important to just stop and acknowledge that. Like, this has been really hard. And so we want to acknowledge that, not feel like we're adding more. I think sometimes it can feel like, oh, so much more. So if we
Just you
take,
saying that, I found myself just taking
yeah,
that big breath of just, everything's okay.
yeah, just one little nugget, that opportunity to name and acknowledge how we're all feeling and to just let it be for a moment instead of like, oh, yeah, things are hard, but I have to do, right? Like just stop and be with it for yourself first. And then we can acknowledge how it is for the children in our lives. So the breathing song I've been teaching and using for years. Usually I end with the breathing song when I do go in and do a teaching. So just to be crystal clear, I am not a singer. So so you know all apologies for the voice, but it's a really simple little teaching tool. And again, music is so helpful in teaching. So make up your own songs too. But it is a great tool and it ties into the book Breathing Makes It Better because it uses breathing and it also uses nature based analogies. And you can change the analogies. Um, I use in the book mountains. So if you sit up, even for yourself, like if you sit up and feel like I'm a mountain, steady and strong, right? Like this sense of mountain and that presence, stability. And for a lot of us, this is what we've needed to call into our system right now, right? This sense of being steady, strong, and stable. And then the other one I use is lake, calm and clear, right? Like this idea of the reflecting of a lake and seeing what's there. So that to me reminds me even of the jar, right? You shake it up and then it settles. The calm sense of calm and clear. So I don't know if do you want me to do the song or
Yeah, let's do the song or a piece of it. Let's I want to hear your voice and I think you have a beautiful voice, so I appreciate you.
so so it's so simple, which is what I love about it. Keep it simple. Never a bad thing to keep it simple, particularly with little ones. So, and there are hand motions. So breathing in, I'm a mountain. Breathing out, I am strong. We'll do that again. Breathing in, I'm a mountain. Breathing out, I am strong. They love that part, the strong.
Yes.
And then the next one is breathing in, I'm a lake. Breathing out, I am calm. Breathing in, I'm a lake. Breathing out, I am calm.
I like that.
And I always hold that last one a little longer. The same with like the bell. Anytime you get them into that still, quiet place, like that moment of stillness and quiet, don't be afraid to hold it. You'll notice when they're getting fidgety and they can't anymore. And then we do 3 breaths. So we put our hand on our belly. We do breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And last one. Breathe in, breathe out. And I hold that for a little while too. And I always talk like modulating your voice. Like these are little teaching tips, right? Modulating the voice, getting quieter yourself, talking slower. Um, but I will say, like when I leave classes and I do that practice, the teachers are because the children are very settled usually. It gives them an opportunity to move from like strength and they do this and they're kind of into it. Then they sort of, again, you're meeting energy, kind of bringing it down, teaching them that they have the ability to kind of regulate and modulate in that way.
I love that. Thank you. I think you have a beautiful voice, and I'm definitely going to incorporate the breathing song into our classroom. And we do a little bit of, transitioning bells and reminding them to connect with their breath throughout the day. But it's beautiful, even just myself playing along with you. I now feel okay, whew, I'm ready to go on to my next item and not just go and do, but to actually just be in flow. So I love that. And so for our listeners here, as we wrap up, if there was one thing that you could kind of pinpoint as a piece of advice, and we probably maybe even talked about it before, but what is that kind of one piece for them to take away as their nugget? I mean, there's so many that we've already spoken about.
This might have to do with where I'm at the moment, but I would say like be kind to yourself first, and everything flows from there. So if you can be kind to yourself and just take one nugget from any of the talks you're going to listen to, it doesn't have to be mine, any of them, for your own practice, even if it's one breath, feeling your feet on the floor, that in and of itself will support the children in your life. So kindness here, often in my teachings, I'll say, come here first before we go here. So I
I
think
love
that
that.
would probably be the
Thank
one thing I would share.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It has been a pleasure to speak with you, Wendy. I am very, very excited. However, we can support you when your next book is ready. Absolutely let us know and we can share it into the community. And thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak with us and our audience here today.
Thank you so much. It was so great to meet you, Crystal. I'm glad we made this connection. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Bye.